Monkey Man opens up with the tale of Hanuman. One day he was hungry, and looking up he saw the bright sun and mistook it for a piece of fruit. But when he leapt up to eat it, the gods punished him for reaching up too high. The heart of Kid's story in Monkey Man is to get revenge for his mother after she was killed. The film explores complex issues, offering commentary on class tension and the perversion of faith to justify violence, and what happens when the oppressed are tired of being disempowered. Monkey Man is a perfect example of a revenge film, which often, but not always, offers implicit or explicit critiques of law structures which have lost sight of justice.
And really it's a revenge film about faith, you know, and how faith can be a beautiful teacher, but at the same time, faith can be weaponized. Faith can be monetized.
Basically, it's a violent action film that condemns the use of faith to justify violence, while also using faith to justify fighting back.
Okay, it's not just me who found that confusing, right?
You like John Wick? Because this just came in.
Revenge films are enjoyable because they tap into the wish fulfillment center, essentially playing into the often buried desire to acquire justice through violent means. Their popularity is typically very indicative of the socio-political climate, and why the genre is sometimes used as a vehicle for commentary. The villains are embodiments of failures in complex systems, so that the execution of vengeful punishment appears as a cure for systemic dysfunctionality. These films address modern anxieties over the perceived uncontrollable complexity of an age of networks, whose sprawling socio-political structures and institutions seem impervious to individuals or groups seeking redress for their grievances. Monkey Man is making clear commentary on the rise of Hindu nationalism. The antagonists are inferred to be stand-ins for the current right-wing nationalists, who weaponize religion to embolden extremism, and marginalize minorities, often violently, and how when the oppressed try to reach for the top, the oppressors will beat them down for daring to dream. It carries universal messages about the danger of systems weaponizing faith to gain political power. Now, the majority of people can't separate a revenge film from reality, and won't be emboldened to get violent retribution on the daily. Revenge films are what they say on the label: entertainment. So watching revenge films can actually spark up reflections on the ideas of revenge and justice. Is vengeance the correct route to go down to achieve parity? Or is violence ever justified, even if you're fighting against oppression? A major critique of the film I've seen is how the main character also uses faith to justify his violence in order to get revenge, causing some narrative dissonance between the protagonist and the antagonist. So in a world that is clearly devoid of a moral center, how can we know which violence to condemn and which to encourage? So again, the question raised is violence ever justified? Let's look at the justification through Monkey Man using Bernard Gert's essay on justifying violence. There are extreme cases in which all rational men would agree that, even if the evil is to be switched from one person to another, there is a point at which the amount of evil to be prevented by breaking moral rules is so much greater than the amount of evil caused by breaking it, that one ought to break it. For Kid, the act of removing these corrupt men from power is less evil than the harm their government inflicts on the people. It is presented as something we should root for as an audience. However, all rational men will demand good specific reasons for believing that more evil is being prevented by violence than by obeying the moral rules. I think Monkey Man addresses the good reasons through Kid's shifting mindset. When he is violent for self-interest, which is gaining revenge, he fails. But when he does it for others, to fight for marginalized groups and against the wider threats of oppression, he succeeds. The inclusion of the Hijra's help is a crucial addition. Their inclusion is not just an opportunity to positively represent an often misrepresented group. It showcases that solidarity between different oppressed groups is incredibly effective when trying to enact social transformation. Now, I don't love the use of shaky cams in films, but I think it serves a narrative purpose here. Kid's purpose is initially filled with the shakiness and unreliability of rage and self-interest, but then becomes steadier when he is imbued with a new sense of purpose that is larger than himself, when he fights for others as well as himself. So in this world and the community Kid is in, he has good reasons to justify his actions. Now, there are some holes in this. Mainly, his shift in purpose isn't quite so explicit in the film. It's more so shifted from revenge to avenging his mother as well as the wider community. I mean, he's supposed to be the Indian John Wick. They can't just get rid of revenge altogether. But where do you draw the line of using violence even for a good cause? When do you stop? See, another facet to justifying violence is the final piece of Gert's essay. A necessary condition for being able to publicly advocate such a violation is that there be a good reason to believe that the violation will prevent more death, pain, etc. than it causes. Hanuman signifies strength and heroism, and his stand-in in the film is Kid. Therefore, his actions would be seen as heroic and fighting for the cause against oppression. But as an allegory to real-life systems, the question it raises for me is this the route to go down? The first thought I had at the end of the film when Kid succeeds was, what now? In revenge films, it's the typical formula. Bad guy does wrong, good guy gets revenge, story ends. What muddies this story more is it's rooted in the very complex topic of oppressive states. These leaders can be the cause of an oppressive society, but they could also just be a mouthpiece for one. Cut off the head, another will come and replace it. So would kids' removal of these leaders prevent more death, pain, etc.? It's hard to say. As a non-political revenge story of a boy avenging his mother, Monkey Man succeeds in creating a very compelling narrative. If it's trying to provide deeper insight on fighting against oppressive systems, it lacks a deeper piece of commentary. So let's entertain for a moment that in this world, there is another option. Let's consider the root of non-violence.
I learned that you need to destroy in order to grow, to create space for new life.
Non-violence is inherently rooted in pacifism, which argues against the use of physical violence in all cases. There are different forms of pacifism, such as absolute pacifism, which completely disavows violence no matter the circumstances, or conditional pacifism, which allows violence depending on just war principles or matters of self-defense. But based in the context of Monkey Man, I want to specifically look into pragmatic pacifism as a case for practicing non-violence. This argues that even in extreme situations, there is almost always a non-violent method that can take the place of violent alternatives. Gene Sharp has compiled a list of non-violent methods, which are designed to hold steadfast even when faced with violent oppositions. Now, historically, non-violent movements have proven to be quite successful in opposition to governments, and pragmatic pacifism argues that as a principle, it is resilient and adaptable when confronting violent political circumstances. Dustin argues that violence is not as reliable as it is often assumed. Ending someone's life does not have predictable political results because it operates in the somewhat intangible web of human relations, which makes it difficult to know what meanings people will assign to it or what actions they will take in response to it. However, both violence and non-violence can fail or be successful. This is dependent on how people respond to each. So, the question is always violence or non-violence. Earlier I said that removing a leader of an oppressive system sometimes doesn't work because another will replace them. But other times it does work and allows for a more peaceful leader to take charge. Violence is often resorted to when people live in a violent system, where they are brutally oppressed, disempowered, and desperate for change. In Monkey Man, it's presented that either non-violence has either failed, or non-violence just isn't an option. Non-violent passive resistance is effective as long as your opposition adheres to the same rules as you do, but if peaceful protest is met with violence, its efficacy is at an end. Non-violence was not a moral principle, but a strategy. There is no moral goodness in using an ineffective weapon. Oppressors are the ones in power. They define the struggle, so if they use violence, the oppressed will be moved to fight back. Because if you live in a violent world and all you know is violence, it's much more difficult to contemplate non-violent actions. Perhaps in this case, it's better to try and make non-violent resistance the norm against oppression, so the use of violence is seen as less favourable. As a film that is making commentary on fighting oppressive systems, there is a lack of consideration of pursuing non-violence. Perhaps they could have included a point of tension of kid contemplating taking non-violent action in order to fight for the people, or taking violent action to fulfill his thirst for revenge. And I think this is what's at the heart of the main critiques I've seen for this film, and maybe including this perspective would have helped to ease the narrative dissonance a bit more. But I also think not contemplating non-violence is due to the nature of the revenge genre. If you're going to go see an action movie, it's much more exciting to see Patel in an incredibly choreographed fight sequence than it is watching him have a philosophical existential crisis. It's arguably not the time or the place for that, and probably not as exciting for a fast-paced action film on revenge. Monkey Man does however raise thought-provoking questions of what is an acceptable way to fight back against these systems. Now, quite frankly, we can go into deeper rabbit holes of what's justified, what's considered oppressive, and all the conditions for revenge or justice, but philosophers have been talking themselves in circles for centuries, and I'm definitely not going to have any answers for you in a YouTube video about Monkey Man. So let's treat this more as a thought experiment.
The pain. It will leave you once it's finished teaching you.
The final fight sequence takes place during the valley, a very apt metaphor for light triumphing over darkness.
I wanted to talk about the caste system with action. We're going to start in a club called Kings, and we're going to start with the poor, the slaves at the bottom in this windowless kitchen surrounded by steam and woks and heat. And then we're going to go up to the land of the kings. And he's going to conquer that, and he's going to bring down those tapestries of those oppressive Maharajas and the opulence of it all, you know, with the help of his band of outsiders. And then he's going to meet a man-made God. And he's going to challenge that God. And then, spoiler alert, heaven.
The film offers universal weight on how to enact social change. If anything, I hope the main takeaway of Monkey Man is to try to do good, to fight for the underdogs and the marginalized when you can. And maybe the idea of finding peace isn't just a fictional fantasy. The creation of this film oddly mirrors the kid's own story, and it's incredibly impressive how through sheer force of will that Patel managed to create this film. And if this is his debut as a director, I think we can expect some incredible films in the future. Though, I do hope the next one is a light rom-com because I need a break from psychoanalyzing society. Okay, bye.